Good evening, and welcome to the second episode in our series, The Future We Need and How to Get It. Tonight we are going to be focusing on the challenges, the second of the beliefs that get in the way of us taking the kinds of action that is needed. 5 ways of thinking that are just under the surface of our actions. The second of them is the belief that our problems are simply overwhelming in their complexity, that they're inherently insoluble. And the best way to disprove this particular myth is to suggest in concrete terms just how many and how potent are the solutions emerging world around. From at all levels of society, people are aware of the urgency of solutions and stepping up to it. The 7 shows in this series, we look at solutions, in each case, in some aspect of society, some different system that needs changing, and show that our most critical problems, in fact, have pivotal solutions. Tonight, we will look first at 6 examples of these, and then we'll talk a bit about what it could mean to take them to scale. The challenge, as it turns out, is less about finding solutions than it is bringing them to scale when we have them. The series as a whole is really designed to bust this particular myth, where in each show we'll look at more of the most promising answers that are emerging across all sectors of society. And again, as with last month's solutions to climate change, our challenge is less to find solutions. We have, in the case of climate reversal, we're actually taking us back to conditions that existed before the Industrial Revolution. There are some 80 to 100 solutions that, if we took them to scale, would actually have that effect. But what exactly do I mean by that, taking a solution to scale? A Silicon Valley term. I just mean making sure that when we've got something that we know works to solve a problem, we put it to work wherever it is needed. We fully institutionalize it. We make it the new normal. I emphasize this matter of scaling now to point to where we'll be going in the remaining shows in this series, which in all cases will focus on systems change. Tonight, we focus on the solutions themselves, especially those that I'm calling pivotal. We are mapping the most pivotal of the solutions we've found so far, actually mapping them out in an interactive map on our website and organizing them by the social systems that they affect and by the different strategies that we can use to bring deep social change. In each show, we'll look at one of these kinds of social systems, each different in how it can contribute to a livable future. For each, we map out the solutions and strategies that are already starting to make the changes needed in this country and around the world. Last month, we challenged the first of our beliefs of our own inability by looking at how we could change the story, changing how we think about our world and what is possible in it, the most fundamental change of all. Because if we don't believe it's possible to actually change things, how on earth are we going to take the actions to do it? We defeat ourselves before we begin. We showed in the case of climate change that there were 100 solutions that are, every one of them, already proven to work. The challenge is to change the larger systems, how we do things, so that we can actually put them to work. Doing that, we can restore the health of the planet as well as meet all our human needs. They work together, not at odds with each other. Tonight, in busting the second myth, we're focusing on the second of the 2 most potent sources of deep social transformation, changing our ways of doing things. Invention, innovation, problem solving, social design, better ways of doing things, new skills, new tools, or reclaiming old ones and putting them to new uses. Technology writ large, not just machines or the new tools themselves, but our ways of doing all sorts of other things as well change in response to new inventions, rippling out to change the world as we know it. This is the process that has shaped human history, all the way from the development of agriculture to the almost overnight and everywhere disruption now occurring in response to the World Wide Web. Here's the thing. Our species are the biggest problem makers this planet has ever seen, but we're also, and even more, the best problem solvers around. If you go to our website and you click on the second hexagon, the one for tonight's show, on our website's map, you should get these branches laid out. That's what will come up. And you will see the 6 solutions that we are going to be working with this evening. I chose these particular solutions first just because I found them so exciting. It was a choice of the heart, mind-blowing in fact. But then as I pulled them together, I realized that of the dozens of possibilities I'd considered, I had in the end chosen these 6 because they have in common that each is about how we can dramatically, affordably, and in a short time, radically expand our own human capacities, the very ones we most need to make the fullest possible use of the great human problem-solving potentials I was just talking about. So I clustered them on the map as building our capacity. But before we go there, before we look at solutions, I need to deal with something even stronger than the second myth, which only says our problems are too hard to solve. Something outside ourselves. The greater resistance to successful citizen action lies even deeper, and it's something very much inside ourselves, our deep bias towards the negative, what I've come to call the pain of the positive. And I encountered it myself in trying to put together this show initially. It is, and with everyone I've talked with, it is, at least in our culture, much easier to accept the negative as realistic. Resignation requires no effort, no expenditures, no risks, no resources. Fear of ridicule is perhaps the most powerful control of human beings we've yet come up with. We are less afraid of being wrong than of seeming foolish, naive, gullible. If we expect less, we are less likely to be disappointed, have our hopes betrayed, have our heart broken again. We don't put effort into something that doesn't pan out or turns out to have caused harm after all. And in addition to the, if you will, the caution, and I'm already standing on the ground, there's an even deeper thing that I've come up against. When we look at the reality of the solutions emerging and the hopes that go with it, and I'm starting to tear up, it's painful. It's painful to see how close we are to something that could work so much better and not be there. There's a kind of grief that goes with it. And in fact, there are therapists who talk about addiction and cycles that go from generation to generation simply because it is easier for people who've been abused and harmed to turn around, take that as the normal and do it again, than to face up to the pain of what their lives might have been had they not had that abuse. We have a whole planet dealing with this right now. What might our lives and our world be like if we were to take these solutions seriously? There's a huge amount of internal resistance. As we look at the solutions this evening, as we talk about them on the other shows, I invite you to monitor your own internal reactions. When the voice says, oh, well, but, that's not possible. Of course we think critically. I am not saying that any of these solutions is easy, that will necessarily succeed at all. The challenge, however, is to believe in it enough to put our whole effort into it and not be holding something back from inside ourselves. Indeed, the core question that keeps coming up from everyone is, will we make it? Will we make it? Are you an optimist or a pessimist? I'm saying that is the wrong question, I have come to feel. The right question is, in what direction do our best chances lie? How do we make the most of whatever chances we do have? Because what we know for certain is that we don't yet know for certain that we cannot make it. And as long as we don't know for certain we cannot make it, we have a moral obligation to do everything in our power and see what happens, because the whole history of the human race and of other systems as well is the unexpected emergent. We are up against it, and if necessity is the mother of invention, you've come to the right show tonight. We have a lot of necessity out there. So I want to focus in particular on that way of changing the world that comes from innovation. The reason it is the second of the two most powerful forms of social change is that the impact it has unexpectedly, usually, the disruptors show up, the world changes in ways nobody expected. A second thing about it that I'm intrigued by more than any of the others, not talking about changing our own individual behavior, we always have the option of doing that up to a point. But when we're talking about changing society, the thing about invention and innovation is that it's something individuals do. Our own creativity can create this huge change. One person developed the polio vaccine. One person developed the internet. Of course, it has to be at the right time. A whole lot of other things have to be in place, etc., all that. But at the moment, it is the creativity of an individual writ large. Another thing that is so powerful about thinking in terms of invention is it grows out of a can-do attitude. One of my most favorite statements was made by Paul Hawken years ago, and I don't have a citation for it because I don't know where I first heard it. But he says, 7 billion people do not wake up every morning determined to destroy the planet. What we have here is a design problem. If you've heard of the city of Curitiba in the state of Paraná in Brazil, its mayor, Jaime Lerner, who's become world famous for solving all kinds of huge urban problems on almost no money by relying on the ingenuity of ordinary people and by treating the people who crowd into his now very popular city, as he puts it, as resources, not burdens, to come together and come up with new, clever solutions. He says, well, the reason I was able to do it is I'm an architect, and I hired only architects after being appointed, not elected, under a dictatorship, and doing all sorts of things that nobody expected him to. But he says, the trouble is most of the world, politicians are mostly lawyers, and lawyers are trained why you cannot do things, and what the constraints are, and what the boundaries. And architects are trained to figure out how to solve it anyhow. So that's the point of our focus this evening. I'll just mention that you'll hear the term design specs again and again, and we'll come back to that this evening. That ties in with the solutions orientation throughout the entire series. In this area, I note all of the professions in the world today are part of the problem, and all of them are part of the solution. Every one of them has innovations, breakthrough innovations, usually kept at the margins. So what we're looking at is for the professions to take the political actions within your own field of work, to figure out how to take the solutions at the margins, bring them into the center. Speaking of architects, they were among the very first to change the standards of architecture to make sure that buildings were built sustainably. That's the kind of responsiveness that when you're thinking, well, where can we go with these ideas? That's where you would go. So here are the 6 solutions we're going to look at this evening. The first is called 3 principles. Each of these is pivotal in its capacity. And this one I'm especially taken by. I first heard about what was then called health realization in Santa Clara Valley, now Santa Clara County. Now they call it the 3 principles. It's growing even stronger in centers around the U.S. where research and expansion are continuing. But the story that I first heard that kind of blew my mind was they took these 3 principles, which they were using to shift the attitude of prisoners, people who are homeless, people who work with the homeless, And they took them into a place in Oakland that was so dangerous that even fire trucks would not go into it without a police escort. They trained local police, local leaders, and some students in how to do it. And here's the story told by one of the leaders of what happened.
This understanding is transforming almost every field of human endeavour. Business, criminal justice system, community, sporting performance, war veteran rehabilitation, coaching, well-being, self-help, schools and education, psychology, addiction, law enforcement.
The reason why I was assigned here is because of the homicide rate, number one. To be such a small community, it was 11th in the nation. Since the training, since the 3 principals came over here, the community became healthy again. Crime went down. The homicide went down for 10 years and still going strong even to today, with 0 homicide.
So that project won the California Peace Prize for those results.
I had about 7 to 8 TV programs wanted to come over here and find out what happened here. That's when I got an invitation to the White House to meet with Clinton.
Since we started 2 years ago, the crime rate in Lakewood has gone down by 62%. Assaults with deadly weapons and robberies with weapons are down by 80%. The National Community Resiliency Project started with our work in Des Moines, Iowa, with a group there called 3 Principles Network. And they had already been expanding the principles into the hospital system, into the schools, through the drama class in the junior high school.
Freemind received a 3-year big lottery grant. Our role is to share what creates and sustains well-being, really. And we use 3 principles as a very sort of simple way of describing how.
I now liken it to the search for your nose. You know, somebody comes to you and you go, I really want a nose. You want to help. But the best you can do is point to their nose again and again and again until they see it.
It's now been 20 years, not a single homicide in the area where these principles were taught. The 3 principles they teach are mind, thought, and consciousness. I'm not going to go into them this evening, but we can get more information on them because the last person you saw lives here in Santa Cruz. And her father was one of the primary founders of this whole movement in psychology. The next one we're going to look at is called Learning to Learn. This is a program that was developed, it grew out of research that was done in Michigan, where they did a very simple thing. They asked what it is that makes successful students succeed and weak students fail. And what they found led to the development of this Learning to Learn program, where, just to give an example, the students in Benton Harbor, Michigan in 2007, only 5% of the high school students there met grade standards in math. In the first week of December 2008, not one of 240 ninth graders in the same area were able to multiply minus signs accurately. By mid-March of 2009, within 3 months of starting Learning to Learn algebra, 1 hour each day, every single one of these students were able to graph linear equations with 100% accuracy, to explain in their own words what it was they had done and why, and to create and solve their own complex problems. That's not isolated. The program has been going for 40 years, and it has worked every single time it has ever been done at very low cost. Building on this research, what they had found out was the only real difference between strong and weak students is that strong students expected structure in what they heard, and they looked for it. They looked for it in lectures. If an instructor went off and started talking about something else after saying they were going to mention 3 things, the student would say, wait, what was the 3rd thing? The weak students didn't look for structure. There was just facts flying at them from all directions, and they would try to grab it and hold on and hope they got the right thing. This is a program that has proven itself with the most rigorous standards, and it simply teaches students who typically are not looking for structure how to find it. Despite having proven itself in historically Black colleges and in middle schools around the country, it has remained at the margins of education. So it's, again, one of these really promising solutions that needs to be brought to scale. The third program that I wanted to share with you is the Khan Academy.
Khan Academy is most known for its collection of videos. So before I go any farther, let me show you a little bit of a montage.
So the hypotenuse is now going to be 5. This animal's fossils are only found in this area of South America, a nice clean band here, and this part of Africa. We could integrate over the surface, and the notation usually is a capital sigma. National Assembly, they create the Committee of Public Safety, which sounds like a very nice committee. Notice this is an aldehyde, and it's an alcohol. Start differentiating into effector and memory cells. A galaxy. Hey, there's another galaxy. Oh, look, there's another galaxy. And for dollars is their $30 million plus the $20 million from the American manufacturer. If this does not blow your mind, then you have no emotion.
We now have on the order of 2,200 videos covering everything from basic arithmetic all the way to vector calculus and some of the stuff that you saw up there. We have a million students a month using the site, watching on the order of 100 to 200,000 videos a day. But what we're going to talk about in this is how we're going to the next level. But before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about really just how I got started. And some of y'all might know, about 5 years ago, I was an analyst at a hedge fund, and I was in Boston, and I was tutoring my cousins in New Orleans remotely.
In the past 10 years, starting from his efforts to help his cousin learn math better, they've gone to 60 million students a year around the world. These are distinct students with tens of thousands of videos, are gaining access to virtually every subject in the curriculum successfully. The bottom line of it, Sal explains, is this. If you give someone a well thought out, short, simple lesson, explaining things very simply and often with humor, and they can watch it on their own time. They're not making a fool of themselves. They can go back again and again, and you build in their own feedback loops for mastery. And growing out of that, working with, it has been picked up on by Silicon Valley, has gotten some massive funding, as well as seeking contributions. The goal is a world-class education for everyone, everywhere, forever. And it's resulting in a different approach to the classroom, what they're calling a flipped classroom. He says it's technology making education more humane rather than less, because students get the content at home. In class, they interact with each other, they work together, and the teacher, who's got excellent feedback from the technology, knows exactly what they know and don't know and can work with them to help them. The next one of these 6 solutions is the nurse-family partnerships. I found out about this because one of our local county councilmen has just brought it to Santa Cruz. It is a project that's been going for 40 years around the country. Basically what it is, when they're pregnant and coming from low-income backgrounds, when they're pregnant, a nurse works with them from the pregnancy through the 2nd year of the child's life in partnership with the family. And these are the results. A $6.40 net cost benefit in return to society for every dollar spent on the program. $6.40 return for a dollar expenditure. Over these 40 years, there have been multiple studies documenting that this is a fully replicable program. The next of the six is service learning. Thousands of colleges now require some kind of internship, working in the community, taking the lessons learned in class, putting them to work in the community. And it has really a move towards shifting the purpose of education, as I like to think of it. Higher education should be to elicit, enable, and empower our higher purposes. And it isn't about getting jobs. It is about getting jobs, but it's also about creating jobs, creating prosperity. And the experience with being of genuine, immediate service in the community shifts how students understand the point of their education and the motivation to learn the sorts of skills we're talking about this evening. The last of the solutions that I just encountered 2 days ago, as I was putting this together, having said all the things I said about innovation, is called Inventing 101. It is an idea put forth by a young woman, herself an inventor. At age 15, she already had 2 patents. I'll let her tell her own story. Alexis Lewis.
I think that anybody can be an inventor. Inventing isn't some crazy, difficult process that's reserved for only those like Graham Bell and Edison. Any sort of science, technology, engineering, and math that you can imagine has an application someplace, and we need people who are doing those things. I'm Alexis Lewis, and I'm an inventor. I'd say I've always been a curious person. Inventing is something simple and human. It's just problem solving with a physical solution. I came across a story of a mother who was forced to throw her infant out of the burning second story of a apartment building to a 10-year-old waiting below. Smoke inhalation is actually a very, very significant threat when it comes to fire deaths. Ironically, you often have first responders on site below but unable to go in and help anybody. Now, if you gave them the ability to deliver a smoke mask to the people trapped inside, they might just be able to do something. Eventually, I ended up developing the emergency mask pod, and I'm currently working on getting that into the field.
We looked at a lot of different mechanisms to try to deploy really a smoke filtration mask that gives folks a little additional time to get out of a smoking condition. Simply putting it in a football shape and throwing it was the most accurate.
In 2011, when there was the Somali famine, I was horrified by what was going on over there. So I read to them a story about hundreds of kids being left by the roadsides to die. And Alexis said, we can't live in a world like that. That just can't be possible. She's always looking with her eyes and always asking with her head.
So I started brainstorming and ended up thinking about the travois, which was originally an invention of the Native American Indians. Basically, 2 poles from a teepee crossed in main vertex, and I updated the idea by putting wheels on it and making it collapsible. The travois would be able to be airdropped on refugee roads, allowing refugees to easily assemble the travois and use it to carry their children to refugee centers where they'd be significantly safer. We have a lot of challenges ahead of us, and the more people who are looking for solutions to problems, looking at things from new and different angles, the better the chances that we'll have not only a future, but a bright future ahead of us. Keep exploring, keep being curious, and keep learning as much as possible.
I love this video because what Alexis has arrived at, she's taken that step already. Yes, I'm an inventor. I was lucky. I was homeschooled. I had a grandfather who actually worked on rockets and really interested me. But I want that to be something every child has the opportunity to be exposed to. So she's now promoting the idea of having a middle school course called Inventing 101, where and children get exposed to how many other inventions were actually done by teenagers, and learning how to do it, and the practice and the hands-on. Which takes us to the very notion of social design. I will mention, I will get more on this in other shows, the Stanford Social Innovation Review and the excellent work they're doing in social design in particular, because that, if we're talking about changing society, we need to have two things. We need to have power, and we're struggling with how do we get the power, but we also need to have purpose. We need to have clarity about what it is we would actually do very concretely that would achieve the kinds of differences we so urgently need. So by bringing solutions to scale, I'm talking about putting what we know to work wherever it is needed, bringing what works from the margins to the center of the professions and occupations, ordinary things that we do, but sometimes requiring radical action. We need to take those sorts of changes as seriously as we take trying to get laws changed or policies changed. Changing how we do things across all agencies, organizations, institutions, businesses, disciplines, professions, norms, and practices. And changing then as we go whatever laws or budgets or standards must change to make that happen. That's when we move into having to change systems. But these are also the ways systems change. Both things are happening. The thing that is the most exciting of all, if you are not only bringing pivotal solutions to scale, but you're doing it in combination, they interact. So what I'd like you to do is think about the 6 solutions we looked at this evening. Changing and healing how people whose take on life is so destructive that it makes them unable to live the fulfilling lives we're talking about. Thinking about if you really want an empowered democracy, what is it that people need to be able to know? That's where Sal Khan comes in. The confidence, going to Marsha Hyman's Learning to Learn program, people who go through Learning to Learn, their grades go up, their college graduation goes, if they have a disadvantaged background, goes from 30% to 95%. They finish college in less time. Their aspirations as to what they can do in life goes up dramatically. And it affects how they handle every situation they're ever in thereafter. Because that fundamental shift in their habit of mind towards looking for structure, expecting to be able to solve problems, makes all the difference. The shift in service learning towards a sense of what can I do? What are my talents and skills that I can bring into the community to make a constructive difference? Imagine all of these changes coming to scale at the same time. Just think about what the world would be like. What else could finally change? What else would have to change as a result? What would such a future be like to live in? Interesting slip when I said failure, because there is a revolutionary, radical side to this. Just imagine that every student graduated with the skills, the self-confidence that goes with being an A student, expecting the social rewards of being an A student. Right now, our notion of success is doing better than others. That's how we define it. Better schools, better jobs, better grades, better neighborhood. Well, of course, education cannot succeed for all. If, by definition, success means doing better than others, you have to ration success rather than produce it. But if the point is to elicit, enable, and engage our higher purposes, that is a win-win all around, but it is also the most revolutionary change in society we could imagine. And it would not come easily. There would be pushback. So on the one side, as these individual solutions make themselves felt and are brought to scale, but on the other side, they're interacting with each other and beginning to really change, open up spaces of possibility, there will be pushback. In fact, my co-host, Leanne Nurse, who was supposed to be on this series with me, has had to pull back. And it has to do with these dynamics that we're talking about. The other part of it that opens up the space that we'll get into in later shows, in addition to politics, economics, is the fact that we are up against such huge challenges and such forced change. The world as we know it cannot go on as it is. So there are a lot of forces far bigger than us that are going to make things change, the breakdown, if you will. The question is, if we have done enough of the advance work, if we have enough solutions lined up, if we have a different mindset, we can move into the space that is opened up by that, maybe achieve changes we've never, disempowerment of those in power, a redistribution of power we haven't been able to do before. Because with the internet, with the knowledge, with the global communications, with the interconnections, with the better understanding of what human beings actually need and are capable of, we might find ourselves moving into yet a new stage in human history. So I will end on this note. Intensive innovation and all our effort to find the best solutions for the most pivotal problems and bring them all to scale. Successful solutions reinforcing and expanding on each other in unplanned ways even, all occurring in and around the tipping point politics of a planet and an economy that no longer work. There might just emerge new conditions we can better all live with, systems far less rigged against us, and in fact actually designed to bring out the best in us, to elicit it, enable it, and empower it. That's what I would call the future we need. We would like to invite you, the audience, to spend some time talking about some of these things. We'll be looking at what might be the implications for your own work. How does it hit you? What are the feelings that come up? What are the ideas that come up? Stories you may have yourself of solutions that you've encountered. And any questions and pushback. And let me say, while I have put the show together around working assumptions that can support this sort of change, it's also an opportunity to just structure the difficult questions, the inquiries, the pushback. Well, that might not work. Why might it not work? Every solution you have to say done right, and if it actually fits the situation. There's lots of trial and error. The young woman, Alexis, talked about all the different ways that she went about designing the football. She puts it out in another video. She says, I was only 15 and I liked things that went boom and burst, and I kept wanting to make little explosive devices that would shoot them into the buildings, but it never worked. They didn't have good enough accuracy. We ended up with just a football shape that the firemen could throw into the building. So let me turn to you, who are good enough to be spending this afternoon with us.
Well, thank you, Nancy, for sharing these wonderful solutions. And I know that there are many wonderful solutions that have proven themselves to be successful, and yet we don't have them chosen to come to scale or to be implemented long term. Often they are funded as experimental pilots,
right.
And then the funding isn't there, even though they prove to be very successful, and that is very discouraging. So I was very interested to hear you say, we need these solutions so that when there's a breakdown, which we're imagining there is going to be, that we will have the solutions available to us. And I wanted to have you clarify that a little bit. Is that exactly what you are saying?
I'm saying actually several different things, and I'm still sorting all this out. At the most fundamental level, I guess I'm talking about systems change, and what we know about complex adaptive living systems is they produce unexpected, sudden emergent properties when pressured. And we're part of that. So that's at the most basic level. On the other hand, what we're going to look at each show are ways that people have successfully not only brought in solutions, but changed systems. And look at it systematically. I'm really interested in what I think of as strategic social action. Responsive social action, what we typically do is like the antibodies of the body politic, if you will. We show up with generosity in a humanitarian crisis, outrage when there's injustice. But stepping back and saying, what's wrong underneath? How do you change that? That's what we'll be looking at. So partly, hopefully, we can actually introduce a lot of changes, and those in turn will trigger more changes. Meanwhile, we have a crisis. So if while we're doing that, these things are moving in place, perhaps the crisis will open up. I'm imagining if we have an economic disaster, that can trigger all kinds of bad things, but it can also cause people to come together and start organizing worker co-ops, other ways of exchanging funds. All these great things we know are out there. So that's what I have in mind.
Okay, thank you. Maybe somebody else has a question or comment.
First of all, I was very moved by your rhetorical comment that acknowledging that the human race or the human species is the greatest introducer of problems, but we were also the greatest problem solver. And that really stuck with me. And then, rather late in the show, I was thinking in terms of this problem solving, in terms of Marcia Hyman's Learning to Learn, about whether some of her insights and her plans and analyses might be useful on the grander scheme that you're talking about. In other words, is part of our inability to cope with all these social and economic and environmental problems and political problems because we're like the failing student who has not yet analyzed it from a systematic organizing standpoint? And could we succeed as a species by mimicking the successful students in her paradigm? And is that part of the model that you are putting forth here for us?
Well, I think it's implicit in the work of the Khan Academy and Marcia's own work, if those were widespread, that we do have available an enormous amount of knowledge that we can make good use of, and that could bring structure to it. But yes, we need, I think, that's why I come back to the idea of strategic social action. If we have a sense of how any particular thing we're doing relates to the whole, how it could make a bigger difference, leveraging each other's good work, then I think that both inspires us and encourages us. It also makes it more likely to happen.
I just had a quick question. So I was really moved how you were saying about students, how there's like the positive student and like more like the negative way. And I was kind of wondering, like, let's say someone does realize what they were doing wrong. They kind of realize, like, I had to change my attitude of how I view things kind of stuff. Could a sort of social action be like you try to move people to think that same way? Or like,
Yes, very much so. Have you had any experiences in your own life where you saw that happen, or ideas about how it could be made to happen?
Well, being a college student, I have experienced a lot of things that you were talking about during your program. I really liked how you touched how having a personal connection with the material or like with the person teaching does help, because it actually does. Because being in being in a lecture, it can be very easy to get lost because you're right. A lot of information can be thrown at you and you can be overwhelmed. But looking for structure, it can make it very easy to be there. Like, you know what? Let me sit down and learn. And it makes it very easy with all the distractions. You're there to learn it. It's very so.
And you're saying, and take that into the political realm as well, in how we.
But
that's what Ray was saying as well. Yeah.
Yes, I agree with Ray too. Because if you applied it to that, also that would be great. But you also mentioned how when it comes to the political, like there's not a tendency to look at structure-wise. It tends to be like we can't do this. Like we're supposed to do this because we can't do this. So if we actually applied a structure to it, it would be easier to make change and to make people believe in that politician and stuff like that. So
another piece of it that we'll talk about it more in other shows, but the idea that we the people govern, which means we the people are responsible for coming together and figuring out solutions to our own problems, and then electing and requiring the people we elect to implement our solutions. When we take our problems to them, they are not problem solvers. That's not what they're good at. And we end up shooting at each other, and they're right in the middle, and we get nowhere. So we have to, first of all, take, and these capacities, these tools are really intended in part to enable us to come up with solutions and then elect the people that will implement them.
I was struck by the idea of the outlier position of the solutions, how some of the solutions that are going to change things are not the dominant way of doing, so that one of the changes we can make is to look in the outskirts and begin to think about how these solutions hanging around in the outskirts could actually be part of a larger change, and how we could connect it up with other changes going, so that maybe even use a solution that started in one place and connect it in a totally different place. And maybe in that different place, all of a sudden, it's accepted and blossoms. So that's one thing that struck me.
I think the core of the challenge of design, of problem solving often, is we start having this conversation, well, what's the problem? Like, I found myself saying, how are people, and I know she's doing that, Alexa's invention about how to carry children when you're running from a war, so you don't have to leave them by the roadside. How do people find out about that? Just think, what are the networks? What role might, if I just said, well, what could I do to help make that something that people know about, becomes a new question.
I'd like to just touch on the deeper issue of greed and power and the forces that are pushing us in all the wrong directions. And how do we confront that and stay positive in regard to positive solutions when we have this negative flow all the time? Do you have any thoughts on that?
It's absolutely right. Our next show, as you may know, is Move the Money. And we are going to head right into the question. We're looking at partly ways of reclaiming our wealth. There's a whole movement towards reclaiming community wealth, public banking, there's an enormous amount of innovation going on in that area. And that's one set of questions. But there's also the fact that for the last 10,000 years, there has been a tendency we don't yet fully understand to concentrate wealth and power, regardless of the system. It didn't take corporations to do that. There have been empire building. So at the same time, the peer-to-peer power of the internet and the knowledge that people now have, as well as the crises we're up against, may actually somewhat change, could possibly do it. And we'll be looking at how that might work. I don't have easy answers.
But that is very nice answer from my perspective. Thank you. Yeah. Easy answers wouldn't do.
No, no.
We know that they're not going to work.
The one in my notebook, I call that overcoming Mordor. And whether we can, I don't know, but I do know some of the pieces. And one of the pieces, the clearer we are about what we want to see happening instead, is a critical piece of it. And it's often an excuse not to go there because we don't have the power. But then we're in this catch-22. I can't really think about what I want because it's too painful. So when I think about what I really want, I immediately say, oh, but how can I get it? Because they're going to stop me.
Yeah.
And actually, there's some very interesting case studies I've looked at during the Occupy movement and others, this great movie, where people actually, they took over. They had all this power. They could have asked for anything they wanted, and they didn't actually know what to ask for, let alone to ask for that thing that is pivotal, that would actually change the system if they got it. So that's a big part of what we're looking at in the show, that missing piece.
Oh, thank you very much, Nancy.
On that last point, one of my slogans that I have thought over that I valued over the decades is, it's not the revolution that matters, it's the reconstruction. And the reconstructions has to talk about what do we build on? What do we build on? It's easier, much easier to overthrow something, but if you can't replace it with something that works, all you've done is create the next tyranny.
Perfect ending for tonight. I want to mention that you can download the little handbook that we're developing, the Citizen Action Field Manual, on the website, and we can use that for the conversation. Thank you so much. I look forward to more.